The glass doors of the Grandview Hotel swept open with a whisper, releasing a rush of cool, lavender-scented air that carried the weight of old money and newer ambitions. Madison Clark stepped into the marble-floored lobby, her designer heels clicking against stone that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. At 24, she possessed the kind of polished confidence that came from never having to question whether she belonged somewhere, until recently. The lobby stretched before her like a cathedral of wealth, all soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Madison adjusted her blazer, a nervous habit she'd developed since joining Hartwell and Associates 6 months ago. This corporate retreat in Atlanta was her chance to prove she deserved her position, that she was more than just another Connecticut trust fund baby playing at having a career. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague Sarah. "Can't wait to see the rooms. Heard they're incredible." Madison smiled, imagining the Instagram posts she'd craft from whatever suite awaited her. She'd worked late every night this week, perfecting her presentation on diversity initiatives. Ironic, considering her company's leadership looked like a country club board meeting. The front desk gleamed like an altar, staffed by impeccably dressed clerks whose smiles seemed painted on. Madison approached with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, her reservation confirmation clutched in her manicured fingers. "Madison Clark, checking in for the Hartwell Corporate Group," she announced, sliding her ID across the marble counter. The desk clerk, a young black woman with kind eyes, typed rapidly. Her smile faltered slightly. "I'm so sorry, Miss Clark, but there seems to be some confusion with our presidential suite. We have 2 reservations for the same room, and—" "Excuse me." The voice came from behind Madison, deep and measured. She turned to see a tall black man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding without effort. Everything about him spoke of success. The Swiss watch, the Italian leather shoes, the way he carried himself like he owned whatever room he entered. "I believe you're discussing my reservation," he said to the clerk, his tone polite but firm. "Marcus Williams. I confirmed the presidential suite last week." Madison felt something ugly twist in her chest, a familiar sensation she'd learned to disguise as righteous indignation. She'd seen this before. People trying to take what wasn't theirs, probably hoping the hotel would upgrade them out of some misguided sense of political correctness. "Actually," Madison interjected, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "I think there's been a mistake. The presidential suite is clearly meant for our corporate group. We're here on business." She emphasized the last word, letting it hang in the air like a challenge. Marcus turned to look at her fully for the first time, his dark eyes taking in her expensive clothes, her entitled posture, the way she'd positioned herself between him and the desk as if claiming territory. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, but a weary recognition that made Madison's stomach clench with an emotion she couldn't name. "I see," he said quietly. The desk clerk looked between them, her discomfort palpable. "Perhaps I could—" "No need," Madison said, stepping closer to the counter. "I'm sure this gentleman can find accommodations elsewhere. We reserved this suite specifically for our company's needs." She didn't look at Marcus as she spoke, but she could feel his presence like heat from a flame. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Other guests in the lobby had begun to notice the commotion, their conversations dropping to whispers. Madison felt their eyes on her and straightened her spine, drawing on every lesson her mother had taught her about getting what she deserved. "Of course, Miss Clark," the clerk finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let me get that sorted for you right away." The key card felt warm in Madison's palm as she turned toward the elevators, her heart hammering with victory and something else, something that felt dangerously close to shame. She didn't look back at Marcus Williams, but she could feel his gaze following her across the marble floor like a weight she couldn't shake. As the elevator doors closed with a soft chime, Madison caught a glimpse of him in the reflection, still standing at the front desk, perfectly still, watching her disappear behind polished steel. The last thing she saw was his expression. Not defeated, but thoughtful, as if he were solving a puzzle whose solution would change everything. The golden key card gleamed in her hand as the elevator climbed toward her triumph, carrying her toward a reckoning she couldn't yet imagine. The presidential suite unfolded before Madison like a promise fulfilled. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing Atlanta's glittering skyline, Italian marble surfaces that reflected her satisfied smile, and furniture that whispered of old European elegance. She kicked off her heels and sank into the plush sofa, already reaching for her phone to document her victory. "Becca, you will not believe the suite I just scored," she said, her voice bright with triumph as her best friend answered on the second ring. The phone's camera captured the panoramic view as Madison panned across the room. "I literally had to fight for it. Some guy was trying to claim it was his reservation." "No way. What did you do?" Becca's voice crackled through the speaker, eager for drama. Madison settled deeper into the cushions, relishing the memory. "I just stood my ground. You know how these people can be. They see an opportunity and think they can just take what doesn't belong to them. Daddy always said you have to be firm with them, or they'll walk all over you." The words flowed easily, carrying the weight of 1,000 dinner table conversations in her childhood home in Greenwich. Her parents had never used slurs. They were too refined for that. But their meaning had been clear in every raised eyebrow, every locked car door, every casual comment about those neighborhoods and their kind. "God, Madison, you're so brave. I would have just let them have it." Becca laughed. "Remember when that family tried to use our country club pool last summer? Thank God security handled it." Madison's reflection smiled back at her from the window, backlit by the golden hour sun that painted everything in warm, forgiving light. She felt powerful here, 30 floors above a city that suddenly seemed manageable, controllable. 3 floors below, in an office that commanded an even better view, Marcus Williams sat motionless before a bank of security monitors. The footage played in crisp high definition. Every word, every gesture, every moment of his humiliation preserved in digital clarity. His jaw worked silently as he watched Madison's performance at the front desk, her casual dismissal of his presence, the way she'd positioned herself like a barrier between him and what was rightfully his. "Mr. Williams?" Janet Morrison's voice cut through his reverie. His assistant of 12 years stood in the doorway, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression carefully neutral. She'd witnessed enough of these moments to recognize the particular stillness that settled over him when the world reminded him that success couldn't shield him from the color of his skin. "She doesn't know," Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving the screen where Madison now celebrated in his suite. Janet stepped into the office, closing the door behind her with a soft click. "Should I have security escort her out? I can have her belongings moved to a standard room within the hour." The offer hung in the air between them, simple and clean. Marcus could end this with a phone call, could watch Madison's face crumble as she realized her mistake. The thought brought him no satisfaction, only the familiar ache of a wound that never quite healed. "No." The word came out harder than he intended. Let her enjoy her victory. Let her make her calls and post her pictures and tell her friends how she put someone in their place. Janet's eyebrows rose slightly. In all their years together, she'd never known him to let such disrespect slide. "Marcus, she needs to learn something," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "and I need to teach it properly. When someone shows you who they are this clearly, you don't waste the lesson." On the monitor, Madison was now video calling someone else, the suite's opulent backdrop framing her animated gestures as she recounted her conquest. Her laughter echoed faintly through the building's security system, each note a reminder of how easily she'd dismissed him, how naturally the cruelty had come. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him. Tomorrow would bring its own reckoning, but tonight, he would let Madison Clark bask in her assumptions. He would let her believe that the world worked exactly as she'd been taught, that people like him existed to step aside for people like her. The lesson would be all the sweeter for the waiting. Morning light streamed through the presidential suite's windows like liquid gold, casting long shadows across marble floors that had witnessed decades of power plays and quiet victories. Madison stirred beneath Egyptian cotton sheets, her phone already buzzing with notifications from last night's social media posts. The suite felt even more magnificent in daylight, a testament to her ability to claim what she deserved. A soft knock interrupted her morning ritual of checking likes and comments. Madison wrapped herself in the hotel's plush robe, expecting room service she hadn't ordered but would gladly accept as another perk of her elevated status. Instead, she found Rosa Martinez standing in the hallway, her housekeeping cart positioned respectfully to one side. Rosa's weathered hands gripped a clipboard, her kind eyes reflecting years of service and quiet dignity. At 52, she'd cleaned these rooms longer than Madison had been alive, watching titans of industry come and go while she remained invisible, essential, and unacknowledged. "Good morning, Miss," Rosa said, her accent carrying the musical cadence of her native El Salvador. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need to verify. Are you certain you're in the correct room? The presidential suite is usually reserved for—" "Excuse me." Madison's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. She stepped fully into the doorway, her posture radiating the kind of authority that came from never having it questioned. "I think I know which room I'm staying in. Perhaps you should focus on your job instead of questioning guests." Rosa's smile faltered, but her professionalism held firm. "Of course, miss. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any confusion. Sometimes the front desk—" "There's no confusion," Madison interrupted, her tone growing sharper. "I claimed this room yesterday because it was rightfully mine. Maybe if people knew their place and didn't try to take what doesn't belong to them, there wouldn't be these mix-ups." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for generations. Rosa's eyes flickered with something. Hurt, recognition, the familiar sting of being reduced to less than human. She'd heard variations of this speech before, delivered by people who looked exactly like Madison, people who saw her uniform and assumed they knew everything about her worth. "I understand, miss," Rosa said quietly, her dignity intact despite the assault. "I'll make sure housekeeping doesn't disturb you again." As Rosa's cart wheels squeaked down the hallway, Madison felt a surge of satisfaction. Order had been restored. Boundaries had been established. She closed the door with a soft click, already forgetting the woman who dared to question her. But Rosa Martinez didn't forget. In the housekeeping break room, word spread like wildfire through the network of women who cleaned up after the powerful, who saw their secrets and heard their conversations and remained invisible by design. Maria from the third floor had witnessed the lobby incident. Carmen from concierge had heard the phone calls. Now Rosa added her piece to the growing mosaic of Madison's character. "She's one of those," Rosa told her supervisor, her voice heavy with the weight of experience. "The kind who thinks we're furniture." 3 floors below, David Thompson knocked on Marcus Williams' office door, his security badge catching the fluorescent light. At 45, David had worked his way up from hotel security guard to head of operations, his military bearing and sharp instincts earning Marcus's trust over 8 years of loyal service. "We need to talk," David said, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "It's about the woman in the presidential suite." Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing quarterly reports that showed his hotel chain's continued expansion across the Southeast. Each property represented years of struggle, of proving himself in boardrooms where he was often the only black face, of building something that couldn't be taken away by assumptions or prejudice. "What about her? She's been treating the staff like dirt," David said bluntly. "Rosa Martinez just filed an incident report. The woman basically told her to know her place." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, carrying echoes of every slight he'd endured on his journey from the housing projects of Detroit to the executive suites of Atlanta. He thought of his grandmother, Evelyn Williams, who'd raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. She'd worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, taking in laundry during the day, and watching neighbors' children in between, all to keep him fed and in school. "Success is the best revenge, baby," she'd whispered to him during those long nights when he'd found her asleep over her ironing board, her hands still moving in muscle memory. "But dignity is the best teacher. Don't you ever forget that." Marcus closed his laptop slowly, his mind already calculating the lesson that needed to be taught. Madison Clark had revealed herself completely in less than 24 hours, Her entitlement, her casual cruelty, her absolute certainty that the world existed to serve her comfort. She'd shown him exactly who she was, and now he would show her exactly who he was. "David," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built an empire. "I think it's time Ms. Clark learned about the true nature of service." The morning sun climbed higher over Atlanta, casting new shadows across a city built on the dreams of people who'd been told they didn't belong, illuminating the stage where justice and reckoning would soon collide. The service elevator descended through the hotel's hidden arteries, carrying Marcus Williams toward a confrontation 20 years in the making. He adjusted the crisp white server's jacket, its fabric foreign against skin that had worn $1,000 suits to boardroom meetings where he'd negotiated deals worth millions. The silver serving cart rolled silently beside him, its contents arranged with the precision of a chess master's opening gambit. Marcus had built his empire by understanding people, their desires, their weaknesses, their capacity for both cruelty and redemption. Madison Clark had shown him everything he needed to know in less than 48 hours. Now it was time to show her something in return. The presidential suite's door opened to reveal Madison in designer athleisure, her hair pulled back in a careless ponytail that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She barely glanced at him as she gestured toward the dining table, her attention focused on her phone screen where she was crafting another social media post about her amazing Atlanta experience. "Just set it anywhere," she said dismissively, not bothering to look up. "And make sure the coffee's actually hot this time. Yesterday's was lukewarm." Marcus wheeled the cart into position, his movements deliberate and measured. The small recording device in his jacket pocket was already capturing every word, every inflection, every casual cruelty that fell from her lips like poison rain. "Of course, miss," he said, his voice pitched to the servile tone she expected. "I apologize for any inconvenience." Madison finally looked at him, her eyes scanning his face with the detached interest of someone examining a piece of furniture. "You're new, aren't you? I don't remember seeing you yesterday." "Yes, miss. First week on the job." The lie came easily, each word a carefully placed stone in the foundation of her coming education. "Well, you seem more competent than the rest of the staff here," Madison said, settling into her chair as Marcus arranged her breakfast with practiced precision. "Half of them barely speak English properly. It's really quite unprofessional for a hotel of this caliber." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each one carrying the weight of every assumption, every stereotype, every moment he'd been judged by his appearance rather than his achievements. He thought of Rosa Martinez, who spoke 3 languages fluently and had put 2 children through college on a housekeeper's salary. He thought of the dozens of employees who worked tirelessly to maintain the standards of excellence he'd built into every property. "Education is important," Marcus said carefully, pouring her coffee with steady hands. "I imagine you went to a good school?" Madison's face brightened at the opportunity to talk about herself. "Yale, actually. Business and marketing. My father always said education separates the wheat from the chaff, if you know what I mean." "I do indeed," Marcus replied, the irony lost on her completely. "You should be grateful for work like this," Madison continued, cutting into her eggs Benedict with the casual authority of someone who'd never questioned her place in the world. "Honest work, good tips if you do well. Much better than whatever you were doing before, I'm sure." Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "You're very generous, miss." Madison reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, placing it on the table with the air of someone bestowing a great favor. "There you go. Keep up the good work, and there might be more where that came from." The tip sat between them like an insult made manifest, less than what Madison probably spent on a single coffee at her favorite Greenwich cafe, offered to a man whose net worth exceeded her family's by several $1,000,000. "Thank you, miss," Marcus said, pocketing the bill with the same dignity his grandmother had shown when accepting charity from church ladies who looked down on her even as they helped. "Will there be anything else?" "No, that's all. And remember what I said about the coffee temperature." Marcus wheeled the empty cart toward the door, each step carrying him closer to the moment when the scales would balance. As the door closed behind him, he heard Madison's voice rise in animated conversation. "Sarah, you won't believe the morning I'm having," she laughed into her phone. "The help here is actually trainable. I just had to explain a few things to this new server about proper service standards. You know how they can be. They need firm guidance or they'll just slack off." The elevator doors closed on her laughter, sealing Marcus in with the weight of her words and the certainty of what came next. In his pocket, the recording device continued its silent work, capturing evidence of a character so thoroughly revealed that no amount of privilege could protect it from the consequences. The storm was gathering, and Madison Clark had no idea she was standing directly in its path. The Grandview Hotel's main conference room buzzed with the energy of corporate ambition, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Atlanta's business district. Sunlight streamed across polished mahogany tables where Madison's colleagues from Hartwell and Associates sat with their tablets and coffee cups, ready to absorb whatever wisdom would justify their company's investment in this retreat. Madison stood at the front of the room, her presentation slides glowing behind her like a beacon of progressive corporate speak. She'd spent weeks crafting this proposal, weaving together buzzwords and statistics that would make the partners nod approvingly while requiring minimal actual change to their hiring practices. "Diversity and inclusion aren't just moral imperatives," Madison declared, her voice carrying the confident cadence of someone who'd never questioned their own place in the world. "They're business imperatives. Studies show that diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones by 35%. The slide behind her displayed a carefully curated stock photo, smiling faces of various ethnicities arranged around a conference table, their expressions radiating the kind of sanitized harmony that existed only in corporate marketing materials. Madison gestured toward the image with practiced enthusiasm. "Our D&I initiative will focus on 3 key pillars: recruitment from diverse talent pools, unconscious bias training for leadership, and creating inclusive workplace cultures where everyone feels valued." The words flowed effortlessly, each phrase polished to a shine that reflected nothing of substance. Madison had memorized the language of inclusion without ever examining her own assumptions, had learned to speak fluently about bias while remaining blind to her own prejudices. Her colleague James nodded approvingly from the front row. "Excellent work, Madison. The metrics are particularly compelling." Madison basked in the approval, feeling the familiar rush of validation that came from performing her role perfectly. She'd positioned herself as the company's progressive voice, the young executive who understood the changing landscape of corporate responsibility. The irony was lost on her completely. During the break, Madison found herself surrounded by colleagues eager to discuss her presentation. The coffee station became an impromptu networking hub, voices rising and falling in the comfortable rhythm of professional small talk. "The service here has been absolutely terrible," Madison announced, stirring sugar into her cup with unnecessary force. "I had to practically train the room service staff myself this morning. You'd think a hotel of this caliber would have better hiring standards." Sarah from accounting leaned in conspiratorially. "I noticed that too. The housekeeping staff seems, well, not exactly the professional level you'd expect." "Exactly," Madison continued, her voice carrying across the room with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I mean, I understand they need jobs, but there should be some basic standards. Education, communication skills, basic courtesy. It's not too much to ask." The conversation continued in this vein, each comment building on the last like stones in a wall of casual prejudice. Madison felt validated by the agreement of her peers, their shared understanding of what constituted proper service, proper behavior, proper people. The conference room doors opened with a soft whisper, and conversations gradually died as a figure entered with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Marcus Williams walked to the front of the room in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his bearing radiating the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned every inch of respect he commanded. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Patricia Hartwell, the company's managing partner, "I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Marcus Williams, CEO of Williams Hospitality Group and owner of the Grandview Hotel chain." Madison's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips, her mind struggling to process the disconnect between the man she'd dismissed as help and the figure now being introduced as a titan of industry. Something cold and sharp twisted in her stomach, but recognition hadn't fully dawned. Not yet. Marcus stepped to the podium with the easy grace of someone comfortable in any room, any situation. His eyes swept across the assembled executives, pausing briefly on Madison's face before moving on without acknowledgement. "Thank you for having me," Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won authority. "I want to talk to you today about something that's often overlooked in our industry discussions, the fundamental importance of treating every human being with dignity and respect." The words hit Madison like a physical force, each syllable resonating with uncomfortable familiarity. She shifted in her seat, unable to shake the feeling that this speech was somehow directed at her, though she couldn't understand why. True leadership in hospitality, in any industry, isn't about managing resources or maximizing profits. Marcus continued, his gaze steady and unwavering. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person you encounter, regardless of their position, their background, or the assumptions you might make about their worth. Madison's hands began to tremble slightly, the coffee cup rattling against its saucer. Something about Marcus's voice, his presence, the way he spoke about dignity and respect, was triggering a memory she couldn't quite grasp. A shadow at the edge of her consciousness that made her skin crawl with inexplicable dread. When we reduce people to stereotypes, when we judge them by their appearance or their accent or their job title, we don't just diminish them, Marcus said, his words cutting through the conference room air like a blade. We diminish ourselves. We reveal the poverty of our own character. The room was silent now, every executive hanging on Marcus's words with the rapt attention reserved for wisdom that cut too close to home. Madison felt exposed, as if Marcus could see through her professional facade to the ugly assumptions that lurked beneath. As Marcus continued his presentation, Madison found herself studying his face, searching for something she couldn't name. There was something familiar about him, something that made her stomach churn with a growing sense of unease. The storm was building, and Madison Clark was about to discover she'd been standing in its eye all along. The conference room emptied in the comfortable chaos of networking and business card exchanges, voices echoing off marble walls as executives filed toward the reception area. Madison lingered near the coffee station, her hands still trembling slightly as she processed Marcus's presentation. His words about dignity and respect had burrowed under her skin like splinters, creating an itch she couldn't scratch. "Ms. Clark." The voice came from directly behind her, calm and measured. "Could I have a word with you privately?" Madison turned to find Marcus Williams standing close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to notice the way his presence seemed to fill the space around him. Up close, without the barrier of a podium between them, something clicked into place, a memory struggling to surface like a body rising from deep water. "Of course," she managed, her voice sounding strange in her own ears. "Your presentation was very enlightening." Marcus gestured toward a quiet corner of the now empty conference room, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Atlanta's skyline. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished table, creating a chiaroscuro effect that seemed to divide the world into stark contrasts of light and dark. "I believe we've met before," Marcus said, his tone conversational but carrying an undercurrent that made Madison's stomach clench. "Yesterday at the front desk, you were quite insistent about claiming the presidential suite." The words hit Madison like a physical blow, each syllable stripping away another layer of her carefully constructed reality. The man she'd dismissed, the person she'd treated as an obstacle to be overcome, stood before her in a $1,000 suit with the quiet authority of someone who owned everything she'd thought she'd conquered. That was... Madison's voice faltered as the full scope of her mistake crashed over her like a tsunami. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale as parchment. "You're the man from the lobby." "I'm Marcus Williams," he said simply, letting the weight of his name settle between them. "And I own this hotel. I own this entire chain, actually." The conference room seemed to tilt around Madison, reality reshaping itself into something unrecognizable. Every assumption she'd made, every casual cruelty she'd inflicted, Every moment of smug satisfaction came rushing back with devastating clarity. "There must be some misunderstanding," Madison said quickly, her voice rising with desperation. "I didn't know who you were. If I had known." "If you had known, you would have treated me differently," Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying a steel edge that cut through her excuses. "The question is, why should my identity matter? Why should anyone have to prove their worth to deserve basic human respect?" Madison's mind raced, searching for solid ground in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. I was protecting my company's interests. The reservation was clearly meant for our corporate group. It was a simple misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you told Rosa Martinez to know her place?" Marcus asked, his voice never rising above conversational level, but somehow filling the room with its quiet power. "Was it a misunderstanding when you suggested that my staff should be grateful for honest work? When you tipped me $5 for serving your breakfast and told me I seemed more competent than the rest of the help?" Each question landed like a hammer blow, shattering Madison's attempts at rationalization. She felt exposed, stripped bare of every defense she'd ever relied upon. "You were recording me?" The accusation came out as a whisper, tinged with the desperation of someone watching their world collapse. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a small digital recorder, placing it on the table between them with the deliberate care of someone presenting evidence. "I was documenting discrimination. Your voice, your words, your casual cruelty toward my employees and myself. This is entrapment," Madison said, her voice gaining strength as she grasped for legal terminology. "You can't use that against me. You were pretending to be someone else." "I was being exactly who I am," Marcus replied, his composure unshakable. "A black man in America, subject to your assumptions about my worth, my intelligence, my place in the world. The only thing that changed was your knowledge of my bank account." Madison's breathing became shallow, her chest tight with panic. "You're trying to destroy me. This is some kind of setup, some reverse discrimination lawsuit waiting to happen." Marcus studied her face with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. "Ms. Clark, I don't need to destroy you. You've done that quite effectively yourself. I'm simply ensuring that your actions have appropriate consequences." The afternoon sun had shifted, casting new shadows across the conference table where Madison's career, her reputation, her entire future now hung in the balance. In the distance, Atlanta's skyline glittered with promise and possibility, a view that suddenly seemed as unreachable as the moon. "What do you want?" Madison asked, her voice barely audible. Marcus's smile was cold as winter morning. "I want you to learn something you should have been taught long ago. Actions have consequences, Miss Clark. And yours are just beginning." The standard hotel room felt like a prison cell after the opulence of the presidential suite. Madison sat on the edge of the queen-sized bed, her designer luggage scattered across industrial carpet that had seen better decades. The walls seemed to press closer with each passing hour, trapping her with the suffocating weight of her own actions. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Missed calls from Patricia Hartwell, text messages from colleagues, and a growing storm of social media mentions that made her stomach churn. The story had leaked somehow, spreading through corporate networks like wildfire. #Grandview incident was already trending, complete with grainy security footage that showed her dismissing Marcus at the front desk. The call from Patricia came at 6:47 p.m., just as Atlanta's skyline began to glow with the amber light of evening. Madison's hands shook as she answered, knowing that her career hung in the balance of whatever words would follow. "Madison, what the hell happened down there?" Patricia's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp with the kind of controlled fury that came from watching a company's reputation crumble in real time. "Patricia, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how you humiliated a prominent black businessman in his own hotel. Explain how you treated his staff like servants. Explain how you've made Hartwell and Associates look like a goddamn country club from 1955. The words hit Madison like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the professional identity she'd spent years building. She could hear other voices in the background, the emergency damage control meeting that was undoubtedly deciding her fate. "I didn't know who he was," Madison whispered, the excuse sounding pathetic even to her own ears. "That's exactly the problem," Patricia snapped. "You didn't need to know who he was to treat him with basic human decency. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. Legal will be in touch about the discrimination lawsuit Williams is considering." The line went dead, leaving Madison alone with the silence that followed the destruction of everything she'd worked for. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window, a young woman who'd thought she understood the world, now confronting the ugly truth of her own character. The call to her parents came from desperation, a child's instinct to seek comfort from the people who'd shaped her understanding of the world. Her mother answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the kind of unconditional love that had always been Madison's safety net. "Sweetheart, we heard about what happened. Are you all right?" "Mom, I think I've ruined everything," Madison sobbed, the words tumbling out between tears. "I lost my job. There might be a lawsuit. I don't understand how it all went so wrong." "Now, honey, don't you worry about that," her mother soothed. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think you're being scapegoated. These people are always looking for reasons to play the victim card." The casual dismissal hit Madison like a slap, forcing her to hear her mother's words with new ears. "These people," she repeated slowly. "Mom, what do you mean by that?" "You know what I mean, dear. They see an opportunity to make a fuss and get attention. Your father says it's probably some kind of shakedown. They'll demand money to make it go away." Madison's father's voice joined the conversation as he picked up the extension. "Madison, you did nothing wrong. You stood up for yourself and your company. If this Williams character was really important, he would have identified himself properly instead of playing games." "But Dad, I treated him terribly. I treated all of them terribly." "You treated them appropriately for their positions," her father said firmly. "There's a natural order to things, Madison. Some people are leaders and some people are followers. You can't let them guilt you into forgetting your place in the world." The words that had once comforted her now felt like poison in her ears. Madison could hear the echo of her own voice in her parents' casual bigotry, could see the direct line from their dinner table conversations to her behavior in the hotel lobby. For the first time in her life, she was forced to confront the ugly foundation upon which her worldview had been built. "I have to go," she whispered, ending the call before her parents could offer any more of their toxic comfort. Alone in the gathering darkness, Madison began to understand the true scope of what she'd done. It wasn't just Marcus she'd hurt, it was Rosa Martinez, who'd cleaned rooms with dignity while being told to know her place. It was every person of color she'd ever dismissed with a glance, every assumption she'd made, every casual cruelty she'd inflicted without thought. The mirror on the hotel room wall reflected a stranger, a woman who'd spent 24 years believing she was a good person while carrying poison in her heart. The reckoning had only just begun, and Madison Clark was finally ready to face the monster she'd become. Outside her window, Atlanta pulsed with life and possibility, a city built by people who'd refused to accept the limitations others had placed upon them. Tomorrow would bring new consequences, new reckonings, new opportunities for growth or destruction. The choice, for the first time in her life, was entirely her own. The viral video had a life of its own, spreading across social media platforms like digital wildfire. Someone had leaked the security footage from the Grandview Hotel lobby, and within 48 hours, Madison Clark's face had become synonymous with entitled racism. The hashtag Grandview Karen trended globally, her dismissive gesture toward Marcus frozen in a loop that played millions of times across screens worldwide. Madison sat in her childhood bedroom in Greenwich, surrounded by participation trophies and college memories that now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. The pink walls that had once represented comfort now felt like the bars of a prison, trapping her with the consequences of choices she was only beginning to understand. Her laptop screen glowed with the harsh reality of her new existence. Every job application she'd submitted had been rejected within hours. Her LinkedIn profile had been flooded with comments ranging from disappointed to vicious. The internet had rendered its verdict, and Madison Clark was guilty of being everything wrong with privileged America. The law firm called again. Her mother announced from the doorway, her voice tight with the strain of defending the indefensible. They want to discuss settlement options. Madison didn't look up from her screen, where another rejection email had just arrived. How much? $2 million, plus a public apology and mandatory sensitivity training. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Madison's trust fund could cover it, but barely. More devastating was the realization that money couldn't buy back her reputation, her career, or the person she'd thought she was. 300 miles south, Marcus Williams stood before a conference room filled with hotel managers from across his chain. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating faces that reflected the diversity he'd fought to build into his organization. This was his response to Madison's hatred, not revenge, but revolution. What happened at the Grandview wasn't an isolated incident, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of lived experience. It was a symptom of something much larger. We have an opportunity to turn this moment into meaningful change. Janet Morrison, his longtime assistant, distributed folders containing the new training protocols they developed in partnership with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Every employee, from housekeeping to executive management, will participate in comprehensive anti-bias education, she explained. But this isn't just about our hotels, Marcus continued, clicking to the next slide in his presentation. We're partnering with civil rights organizations to create a national dialogue about dignity in service industries. The Madison Clark incident will become a teaching tool, not to shame her, but to educate others. Dr. Angela Davis, the civil rights attorney who joined their initiative, leaned forward. We're calling it the Dignity Project. Real stories, real consequences, real change. Madison's actions hurt people, but they also opened a door for conversations that needed to happen. Back in Greenwich, Madison's phone buzzed with a notification that made her stomach clench. The Dignity Project had launched its first video, a documentary-style piece featuring Rosa Martinez talking about the daily indignities faced by hotel workers. Rosa's weathered hands gestured as she spoke about raising children while being treated as invisible, about the strength it took to maintain dignity in the face of casual cruelty. I clean their rooms, I serve their food, I make their beds, Rosa said to the camera, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. But I am not less than them. My children are not less than theirs. We all deserve respect. Madison watched through tears as other hotel workers shared their stories. Moments of discrimination that echoed her own behavior with devastating clarity. Each testimony was a mirror reflecting the casual racism she'd inherited and perpetuated without thought. The video ended with Marcus speaking directly to the camera, his words measured and powerful. Change begins with accountability, not just for Madison Clark, but for all of us who've remained silent when we should have spoken up, who've looked away when we should have acted. Madison closed her laptop and stared at her reflection in the darkened screen. The woman looking back was a stranger, unemployed, disgraced, facing a future shaped entirely by the consequences of her choices. But for the first time since the incident, she felt something other than self-pity. She felt the first stirring of genuine remorse, and with it, the possibility of becoming someone different than who she'd always been. The price of prejudice was higher than she'd ever imagined, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to pay it and find redemption on the other side. The community center in downtown Hartford smelled of coffee and old books, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across folding chairs arranged in a circle. Madison sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, listening as other participants shared their stories of confronting their own biases. 6 months of therapy had stripped away the defensive armor she'd worn her entire life, leaving her raw and vulnerable, but finally able to hear truths she'd spent years avoiding. I used to think I wasn't racist because I never used slurs, said Jennifer, a middle-aged teacher whose voice trembled with recognition. But I realize now that I made assumptions every day. About my students, about their parents, about what they were capable of achieving. Madison nodded, feeling the familiar ache of recognition that had become her constant companion. Dr. Sarah Chun, the therapist who'd guided her through months of painful self-examination, had helped her understand that racism wasn't just burning crosses and white hoods. It was the thousand small cuts of assumption, dismissal, and casual cruelty that she'd inflicted without thought. The letter to Marcus had taken her 3 weeks to write, each draft revealing new layers of understanding about the harm she'd caused. She'd thrown away dozens of versions that sought forgiveness or made excuses, finally settling on words that simply acknowledged the truth of what she'd done and the privilege that had blinded her to its impact. The response had come 2 weeks later, a brief email agreeing to meet at a neutral location in Atlanta. No warmth, no forgiveness, just a willingness to listen that felt more generous than Madison deserved. The coffee shop Marcus had chosen sat in the heart of Atlanta's sweet Auburn district, surrounded by the ghosts of civil rights history. Madison arrived early, her hands shaking as she ordered a simple black coffee and found a table near the window. When Marcus entered, his presence still commanded the room, but Madison saw him differently now. Not as an obstacle to be overcome, but as a human being whose dignity she trampled without thought. "Thank you for seeing me," Madison said as Marcus sat across from her. The distance between them carried the weight of everything that had happened. "I wasn't sure I would," Marcus replied. "But Dr. Chun said this might help." "I don't expect forgiveness," Madison said. "I just need you to know I understand now. Not only what I did to you, but what I've done to people who look like you." Marcus studied her. "Tell me what you understand." "I was raised to see myself as the standard," she said. "When I dismissed you, I was part of a system that's told people like you for centuries you don't belong. My comfort came at the expense of others' dignity." "Understanding is a start," Marcus said. "But without action, it's just another privilege. That's why I'm here. Not for absolution, for guidance. I want to turn my shame into something useful." Marcus paused, then said, "Forgiveness takes more than words. But if you're serious, maybe we can work together. Not as friends, maybe never, but as people making sure this sparks change." 2 years later at Emory, Madison stood before restless students. "How many of you consider yourselves racist?" she asked. No hands rose. "I didn't either," she said. "But racism isn't just hate speech. It's assumptions, privilege, and small cruelties we don't notice." Behind her, the hotel footage played. "This was me. I lost everything. But the tragedy wasn't my fall. It was what I did to him, and to everyone I dismissed." Marcus watched from the back. Their relationship was built on respect, not forgiveness. "The hardest lesson," Madison continued, "is that good intentions aren't enough. Real change means examining ourselves, even when it's uncomfortable." A student asked, "But what can we do?" "Listen," Madison said. "Question your assumptions. Use your platform, and accept that the work never ends." Afterward, Marcus approached. "Good talk." "Thank you," Madison replied. They walked toward the exit. "The work continues," Marcus said. "It does," Madison agreed. In her rearview mirror, Marcus stood in the light. They might never be friends, but they were partners in accountability, the long work of building a just world.